Welcome to Modern Man Essentials, where you'll discover the secrets to becoming the man every woman can't resist. Today, I'm going to reveal 10 incredibly subtle signs you might not have noticed, but every woman certainly does. Think you're just an ordinary man? Watch this entire video to discover that you're actually the high-value man every woman desires. Sign 1. You have confidence without bragging. Confidence is one of the most powerful yet invisible weapons a man can have. What's remarkable about high-value men is that they don't need to brag to prove it. Their confidence shines through the way they stand, walk, and face life's challenges. A confident man doesn't need to raise his voice or cause a scene to be noticed. Women sense this confidence in the small details, like the way you hold eye contact, how you smile subtly but convincingly. This makes you naturally attractive. And women feel safe and respected when they're with a man like you. More importantly, this confidence isn't just about appearance. It's reflected in how you handle complex situations, in your unwavering stance during tough times. This shows that you're a man with great control, and that's precisely what women are truly seeking in a partner. Sign 2, you listen instead of just talking. In an era where everyone wants to speak but few want to listen, a man who knows how to listen is a rare gem. That's why women are strongly attracted to men who have good listening skills. When you listen, you're not just hearing with your ears, you're also listening with your heart, showing understanding and empathy. A high-value man doesn't interrupt others to assert his own opinions. Instead, he knows how to keep quiet, nod encouragingly, and only respond when necessary. This doesn't just make women feel respected, it also makes them feel comfortable and more willing to open up. Interestingly, when you truly listen, you learn a lot about the woman you're talking to. You gain insight into her likes, her desires, and even her fears. This helps you build a deeper, more sustainable relationship. Sign 3, you always keep your promises. Promises are not just words for a high-value man, they're commitments. Women recognize and appreciate men who always keep their promises because it shows reliability and honesty. When you say you'll do something, you do it on time and do it right. This not only builds trust, but also shows that you're a responsible man who values his word. Women feel safe being with a man like this because they know they can rely on you in any situation. But it's not just about keeping promises to others, it's also about keeping promises to yourself. This shows that you have self-discipline and are always striving to achieve your goals. Women see this and know that you're a man with a strong will, worthy of their emotional investment. Sign 4, you have a clear career or passion. A high-value man always knows where he's going and what he's doing. Women are attracted to men who have clear direction in life because it shows you not only have goals, but also the drive to achieve them. You might be pursuing a promising career or have a passion that you dedicate yourself to. This not only makes you attractive, but also shows that you're responsible and have long-term vision. Women feel safe knowing that you're building a stable future and that they could be part of it, especially when you talk about your work or passion. Your eyes light up, and that really draws women in. They see in you a man full of enthusiasm, always ready to face challenges to achieve what he wants. This makes you not only attractive, but also a man they can admire and respect. Sign 5, you treat others well. How you treat others is a true measure of your value. Women pay close attention to how you interact with everyone around you, from those in power to those who have nothing to offer you. A high-value man is always kind to everyone, regardless of their status or circumstances. This not only shows respect, but also reveals that you're a compassionate and understanding man. Women feel this warmth and believe that you are a man with a big heart, someone they can trust and rely on. In particular, when you respect and listen to the opinions of others, you not only create a friendly and harmonious environment, but also make women feel comfortable around you. They see in you a man who is not only strong, but also full of emotions, and this greatly enhances your appeal in their eyes. Sign 6, you stay calm in all situations. Life can be full of stress and challenges, and how you handle those situations says a lot about who you are. Women are strongly attracted to men who can stay calm even when everything around them seems to be falling apart. When you maintain your composure in tough times, you show that you have great control and aren't easily swayed by emotions. This doesn't just make you more reliable, but also makes women feel safe when they're with you. They know that you can handle any situation rationally without letting emotions take over. This is particularly important in relationships because women always look for a man who can be a steady rock in difficult times. When you can stay calm and find solutions, you don't just show maturity, but also demonstrate that you are a man capable of leading and protecting those you love. Sign 7, you have a suitable fashion style. Fashion is one of the first things women notice about you, but what matters most is not whether you wear expensive clothes or follow the latest trends, but whether you know how to choose outfits that suit yourself and the occasion. A high-value man understands that personal style is a way to express yourself without saying too much. You know how to pick items that highlight your strengths and always keep your outfit neat and clean. This doesn't just make you look elegant, but also creates a strong impression in the eyes of women. Women are particularly sensitive to the small details in your style, from the watch you wear to how you coordinate your outfits. When you pay attention to these things, you show that you are a man of taste and care about your appearance, making you much more attractive and appealing. Sign 8, you are decisive. Decisiveness is one of the qualities that women highly value in men. A decisive man not only knows what he wants, but is also willing to take action to achieve it. This doesn't just show confidence, but also indicates that you are a capable leader. When you display decisiveness, you not only create a strong impression, but also make women feel safe around you. They know that you are a man who can make quick and accurate decisions without hesitation or doubt. This increases the respect and admiration they have for you. This is also clearly reflected in personal relationships. Women always look for a man who can lead them, someone who can make tough decisions when necessary. When you show decisiveness, you demonstrate that you are a man who can protect and lead the relationship, making you irresistible. Sign 9, you are independent. Independence is one of the clearest signs of a high-value man. Women are attracted to men who don't need to rely on others to feel complete or happy. You can make your own decisions, take care of yourself, and enjoy life without depending on anyone else. And when you are independent, you show that you are a strong, self-reliant man who has control over his life. This not only makes you more attractive, but also creates a sense of freedom and comfort in the relationship. Women feel that they can be themselves when they're with you because you don't try to control or impose on them. Moreover, independence makes you more reliable. Women know that you won't let external factors influence your decisions, and this increases the respect and trust they have in you. You are a man they can rely on, but you also respect and support their independence. Sign 10, you have wisdom and life experience. Finally, one of the things that women value most in a high-value man is wisdom and life experience. You have been through many things in life, and the lessons you've learned are invaluable treasures that no one can take away. Women are attracted to men who can share life lessons and experiences they've accumulated over time. You are not just a knowledgeable man, but also someone who can guide and protect others. This not only creates a deep connection, but also makes you someone they can trust and rely on. Especially when you share your experiences and advice, you don't just help women learn and grow, but you also show that you are a man of true value. Women feel safe and protected when they're with you because they know you've been through a lot and can guide them through any challenges life may throw at them. So we've just gone through 10 subtle signs of a high-value man that every woman notices. Which of these signs do you have? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button to always stay updated with the most attractive tips from Modern Man Essentials. See you in the next video.